John, why don't you start introducing yourself, a little bit about your background, what you do, your role, and then we'll quickly go through here until we get the introductions.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm John Weigelt. I'm Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft in Canada, and that really sees me helping organizations innovate with technology. So I looked 3 to 6 years out and helped organizations figure out where technology is moving. Lately, I've been accountable for the compliance of the Canadian data centers, which we have in Quebec City and Toronto, and helping organizations wrap their heads around that. And the reason I'm doing that is because I've got 25 years experience in IT security, from bits on the wire, so you can blame SMIME on me a little bit, all the way through to policy. I helped write PEP legislation when I was in Treasury Board Secretariat. So that broad range stands me in good stead to help you with your compliance challenges.
Excellent. Thank you, John.
Yeah, great. So Jonathan Dale from IBM, in particular IBM Security, which if you go another layer deeper, it's MAS 360, right? And that's responsible for helping you and IT teams manage smartphone, tablets, laptops, both enabling them for productivity, but also importantly securing them, making sure data stays where it's supposed to, which is on this device or in approved applications and not going off on the web somewhere, or the user mistakenly cutting and pasting it to their friend in iMessage, if you will. And so, my background is not core necessarily cloud or core hardcore security, but I can certainly represent smaller pieces of that in hopefully today's conversation.
Excellent. Ben?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Benjamin Rossignol, working for Cisco. I've been in the industry for 13 years, focused on security for the last 8 years, mostly covering the federal government now. So I'm spending a lot of time in Ottawa, and I'm just helping my customers in order to move forward with all the digital transformation and so on and so forth. And in the meantime, making sure that we do our best in order to secure their environment.
Good morning, Benjamin. Good morning, everyone. Gordon Blackie. I'm from Checkpoint, Vice President of Sales for Eastern United States and Canada. And my background, I've been in telecommunications for almost 30 years now. That's aging myself a little bit. Primarily in networking and security. Background, I came from Cisco, 17 years working for Cisco, and for the last 14 plus months I've been at Checkpoint. And obviously, many of you are our customers, and security is top of mind for most of them. So, good morning.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So we will take questions, and I think we can take questions throughout. So raise your hand, and we'll make sure we get our attention. But before we do that, let's just start with a little bit around legislation. So there's enhanced legislation in terms of privacy, personal identifiable information. We've got anti-spam legislation and so forth, mandatory breach notification. So talk to us a little bit about how you see the level of regulation changing and what impact you see that having on Canadian organizations. And from your point of view, how prepared are we to deal with this as Canadian organizations? Maybe start with you, John, here.
Sure. So we have a lot of organizations that are focused upon the regulation de jour, right? So as CIOs, you know that the regulations that you need to follow are many. Mm-hmm. And so it tends to be, okay, so what's the hot topic? We see GDPR being a hot topic right now, and organizations trying to wrap their heads around that and understand how that fits within their particular environment. In Canada, we have a hodgepodge of privacy legislation, and it causes challenges as you look across provinces and people trying to understand what's applied and what's not, what's required and what's not. I think the biggest challenge we have is around this idea of policy projection, right? When we talk to chief privacy officers in organizations and we ask them what they need to do, often what they do is they project what the privacy commissioner might or might not say. They make a speculation, right? There's purposeful ambiguity in the legislation. They go, I think the privacy commissioner would say X, Y, or Z. And I've had the good fortune to meet with the privacy commissioners. And I recall one meeting I had with a healthcare provider in the afternoon after having met with a regional privacy commissioner. And the healthcare community said, hey, our privacy commissioner would never agree to this. That's something that's really, really offside. And yet in the morning, the commissioner said this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Right? And so we as Canadians tend to be pretty risk averse. Sometimes the chief privacy officer feels that they're the chief jailable officer, and so they take a very risk averse approach to things. And we as the business people, the IT people, the risk people need to push them out of their comfort zone and say, look, here's what you can do and how you can deliver that enhanced service.
Yeah, if I would just add to that, what is the primary objective of all this legislation is to give back control, the power, to the citizens and how their information is being dispersed, who's using it, where is it being stored, how is it being accessed, how do they get access to their information, and making sure that's readily available for them, right? Flip side of that is companies. They need to catalog all the information that they're storing, why they're storing it, do they need all that information, and how are they ensuring that they're going to keep it protected? And that's really the goal here. So they need to share, what is their risk mitigation strategy? How are you doing encryption? What's your DLP play? How do you ensure you have anti-malware? And what is your mitigation strategy to deal with that? So I see it's a little bit of both sides. There's been a push from the citizens to ensure their data is protected, and secondly, governments are stepping in to ensure the companies are being held accountable.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about it. There's companies being born for the sole purpose of helping other companies maintain compliance and regulations, right? It's that complex of a topic. And you mentioned GDPR, which is very heavy on everyone's minds as we lead up, into the early half of next year. But as you start looking at your different strategies, especially if you're thinking of a cloud type strategy, which we all are, right? Depending on which country you're operating in, right, there's different regulations that you need to comply with. And some of those regulations may make it so that you need to ensure that the data in that country is staying in country, right, versus the data going out into other countries. So ensuring you understand, right, which providers you're working with and where they're supporting localized data centers could be very important to you.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Like, data sovereignty is like top of mind, not only for the government, for everyone in Canada. So the fact that companies like Microsoft moved in Quebec, in Montreal, actually, it's very important. Actually, it's helping like driving this cloud initiative and people moving their business resources in the cloud.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
a very good point. Yeah.
And you can keep going layers deeper, right? It's not just a quick one-size-fits-all type of answer from a data center perspective or where data is going. You may be working with solutions or specific providers where if they're solving a few use cases for you, those use cases essentially, not in a negative way, but get around regulations because they may not be collecting personal or sensitive information. So it's okay if that data is going out of country or not.
Right.
But there's so many aspects of compliance. It does make your head hurt.
I think one point I'll add before we continue on that is this misconception that it's only applied in country. Being a foreign or domestic company, you have to comply with the regulations.
That's right.
Right? It's not an option. And there are ramifications. And you have to decide, looking at the cost analysis, how much will it cost me as an organization to maintain these data records, and what's the implications if I don't do it correctly? Right? So it's not just an in Canada or in Europe mandate. It's something you as a company, when you're operating in and out of these countries, you have to follow.
So we started touching on cloud, so just hold that thought for a little bit. But before we kind of move off compliance or regulations, are there questions from the audience around those specific topics in terms of what we see changing, what's coming down the pipe? Any questions for our panelists around that? Go ahead.
Some of you talked about the data at rest. What about the data on motion? Because we can say having a data center in the country is good, but when data on motion, you really don't know. It's a kind of a black box. How it's routed, whether it's routed within the country or it's going through a network across the country.
Yeah, so the question is all around data in motion and security, compliance relative to data at rest. So who from the audience, on the panel here want to go first, address it?
So I think when we start to look at data in motion, like we have to remember the internet is what the internet is, right? And so it's a globally distributed environment. And when we look at Canadian infrastructure is north-south, right? So if you're making a telephone call from Halifax to Victoria, BC, the chances are it's not going on the single fiber optic cable that's going north of Lake Superior, right? So it's routed everywhere. And the same thing goes with electricity grid, same thing with our energy grid, trains. So we have this infrastructure that goes north-south. The internet is based upon a worldwide community, right? In order for the internet to work, it's got to make some decisions based upon where you're coming in, because you want it to work around the world, right? And so we rely upon the internet for this global connectivity, and yet then all of a sudden we start to say, well, data in transit, we're worried about where it's going in different locations. So we need to balance what we're doing today with kind of the fabric that the internet is. We do have mechanisms to protect information as it goes in transit, right? And so there's transport layer security, you've got that across the board. We use it for banking, we use it for all these different types of systems to secure that information in transit, so that we can have that trust from ourselves to our trusted business partner. Because after all, at the end of the day, you're working with ourselves, with IBM, with Checkpoint, with Cisco, you're working with a trusted business partner to do these types of transactions. And so the question then comes in, this question of trust as you're doing that business with that individual. We can go down this road of speculation of saying, you know what, there's quantum crypto and all our crypto's done, right? So we can say what they're doing in Waterloo, Michele Mosca, is just world breaking and they can break all this crypto. Okay, what's the likelihood of that? Let's start to look at some of these scenarios and unwind that and start to look at the risks involved with it and start to have these rational conversations about it instead of going off to a Hollywood style script where, you know, people are moving satellites around or people are getting plucked up by helicopters. Like some of the scenarios that people portray to me are just like, seriously, you that's what you think about? Okay, I guess you're in that small range of the world that has that type of concern. And so I think, you know, looking at the proper techniques, proper controls, understanding your business partner, understanding your risk today, how are you doing business today? If you look behind that curtain, you might kind of wince and say, oh yeah, that move to that next generation technology might help.
Mm-hmm. Well said. No?
Yeah, no, I think nail it.
Other questions in the back there?
You mentioned about moving to next generation technologies and how it can help improve security posture, but it seems like every hack we hear about these days is because organizations still can't get the basics done fundamentally correctly.
Yeah.
And how do we expect to move forward? What's your thoughts on how are we going to move forward, move the bar forward on security if organizations can't even do the basics properly?
Yeah, great question. Jonathan, you want to
Well, I can certainly, if someone else want to go first, I have lots to add, so.
I could jump in first. I mean, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head with that question specifically. If you think about organizations today, and we did a study, less than 10% of organizations are taking advantage of full threat capabilities. That means 85+% are using basic functionality in terms of firewalling or IPS, right? And there's an opportunity there to look at the whole spectrum of technology that's currently available, but it comes down to education. Lots of smaller organizations, less so in the large ones, but lots of the mid-market customers are having a hard enough time just keeping the lights on, keeping the patches up, the firmware is up to date, right? So education is the first thing, and then it comes down to how do we put together a security architecture that's multi-layered in its capabilities that include not just next-gen firewall and IPS, but anti-bot, anti-malware, capabilities around threat prevention, threat extraction. So before you get into doing all of this, we first have to educate what is available, make sure you have the right staffing in place, and then put in place a security policy and architecture that takes advantage of all this technology.
Yeah, and I think like defense in depth, that as Gordon explained it, it's one of the key, right? Like you need the basis, and especially if you look at, we always say it's not a matter of if you're going to be breached, it's a matter of when you're going to be breached, right? No matter how many layers, you may end up in a phase where there is a problem, and the most important thing at this point is how quickly can I remediate when something bad is happening, actually, right? So time to detection and remediation are key, no matter how many layers you have. But even today, when we see like many companies, like they went through all the bases, do segmentation and so on and so forth, bad things still happen, unfortunately. So time to detection and time to remediate are like very key points.
Yeah, just one, I want to add to that in terms of the attack surface. So one of the things that our vulnerability resides at the perimeter of our office. Well, if you're using the cloud, then you've just extended your attack surface. There was talk about mobile data. If I have a mobile device, it becomes a backdoor for a hacker into your data center. So all of these extend the attack surface of an enterprise. And you need to make sure that whatever strategy you're putting in place for security, it covers virtualization and microsegmentation in the cloud, and it covers threat prevention on the mobile device for those mobile operators, right? And if I look at it, it's no longer about detection, it's about prevention. How do we prevent that attack? How do we ensure that from a zero-day malware perspective, brand new signature, never been seen before, we stop it at the perimeter, right? So detection's great, but threat prevention is what you need to be thinking about. And it gets back to the question you asked earlier, how do we keep pace? Education is key. And what I hear too often is organizations put together their capital budget plans for the year, but it's always about the product and not about the people. Yeah. And you need to start with the people. They need to be educated, make sure you have the right training programs in place, and then you put a security architecture in place.
Yeah, to just hit on another aspect of the question you asked. So from an IBM perspective, as everyone knows in this room, we're very heavy on leading with Watson and AI. But in the security space, there is so many concrete examples of why it's so important. And it usually starts, you're talking about education a lot here, it does start with education, but we know there's a gigantic skills gap in the security field, right? And so organizations need help filling that security gap. And so there's AI, in our case, we can call augmented intelligence, artificial intelligence. It is not about, as the professor was saying, not necessarily about replacing workers. Workers you're never going to have. You're never going to have the amount of workers you need to do certain activities. So we need to be smarter. And when we're talking about discovering and detecting, you know, most of these breaches that are coming in, they're taking weeks, if not months, to become detected. Why is it? Or some of these organizations are getting the proper alerts from the systems they've invested lots of money in, but they're missing them. And so part of the strategy, I believe, besides going back to basics, which is definitely necessary, you've got to make sure everything is patched. But if you're not doing that, are you even aware, right? So if you're not aware that everything's patched and you know it's all, or you believe it's all patched, that's where the dangers start. Right? And then if you take some of these automated approaches with AI and helping detect these threats very quickly and helping you remediate them, I think it goes a long way. And that's towards the future of security, is getting a cognitive type approach. But also, and you started going into this, and I don't want to jump the whole conversation there, but you're really talking about an entire immune system and being able to, right, go from prevention, threat hunting, right, and all the way to your security orchestration and analytics, eventually towards remediation, right? But I think it starts with, you know, augmenting what you have today. And it's not with more workers, right? It's with a smarter solution to help you detect what's out there.
And collaboration between the vendors are key as well, right? Because
huge.
We're facing, like, if you look at the whole equation, it's like pretty unfair. Like, we're facing like the bad guys who are like very well organized, very well funded, collaborating between each other. So we have to do the same thing as well. For them, it's just a matter of, they just need like one chance and one small point of entrance. For us, we need to look at everything. And this is why like vendors collaboration is absolutely primordial, if I may say.
When I look at the space, I get bored, right? So been doing this for 25 years, looked at the Orange Book series, look at all the guidance out there, and I look at some of the news articles that are out there. So when you look at the news article, double click on it, and you find out that someone brings in a USB stick. Oh, someone has a weak password. Oh, someone hasn't updated. Oh, these are the same things happening over and over and over again. People are pointing towards the cloud and they say the cloud's not secure. These have nothing to do with cloud. Right? These have to do with the same old thing. And what do we do as security practitioners? We keep doing the same old thing. Here's another guide, 250 pages, do this. Here's another compliance thing, do that. We need to change up the way that we're talking about things. We need to get out of this perimeter defense model. We have to assume breach. We have to look at each individual device, and we have to say this is how we're going to protect our data. We need to start looking at new ways of doing the business. We need to embrace these new models, you know, machine learning, AI. We need to embrace these other tool sets. We need to simplify the message. We can't go in and talk to people, IPS, IDS, DDoS, blah, blah, blah. Simplify the message. We're going to have over 1 million businesses in Canada that are part of the infrastructure. How do we help those 1 million businesses raise the bar? We need to simplify. We need to measure things. What's a good security program? Stop looking at bad. The fact that I left my door unlocked and wasn't robbed is not a good thing. We keep saying, well, you weren't hacked today. That's not a measurement of a good program. Right. You need to measure the right things. Yeah. No more guidance, start acting, right? And so people look at like Windows 10 as a service and they say, well, Windows 10 as a service, oh, I'm not happy that's calling back. Well, hold on a second here. We're keeping you up to date. We're giving you the latest stuff. There's a balance that's here.
Yep.
Then we need to be able to scale that, and we need to be able to harness the ecosystem. Maybe if you're a small business, you go to the bank, and the bank says, I'm going to give you a discount on your services if you use the latest version of software. And maybe the courier is going to do the same thing. So I think we need to have that nudge, and we need to look at things from a different lens so that we can really make that change. Because, again, the same thing keeps happening over and over again. There's 4 quick techniques that can prevent most of those attacks.
Right.
I just want to make a comment on what John said and what you've said as well. And it was mentioned that the cloud's not the problem. Absolutely is not the problem. In fact, we believe the cloud is part of the solution to overcoming these problems. You had mentioned collaboration. Obviously, from a partner collaboration perspective, collaboration is part of that recipe as well. And then which was a theme of this event, which AI and cognitive, which is your 3 Cs. And that's the third component of how you're going to, in the future, be able to successfully tackle this large topic of cybersecurity, right? Those 3 Cs. Because as we know, right, the bad guys are all collaborating, right? It's an organized crime, really, is what's going on, right? It's organized crime. There's businesses, there's operations, paying people to essentially hack networks or create malware and get into, our networks and attack us.
Yeah.
They're working Monday through Friday.
With support centers.
Yes, yeah, exactly. They're working Monday
kind
through
of funny,
Friday, just
but
like you're
yeah.
working Monday through Friday.
So difficult to address. So it's not going to go away, obviously, as a problem. So we all need to find the approaches around it. So we said that cloud is not the problem. The cloud is the solution.
Part of it.
So now we're all, have to go back to our respective business owners, CEOs, and others who may still believe that the cloud is the problem, or at least not the solution yet. So if I'm going to talk to my CEO about the cloud, what should I tell them about the shared responsibility? You said that attack surface is extending. So, the answer can't be that I'm just going to go to the cloud and therefore it's secure.
No.
So what's the shared responsibility? What's the most important thing for my company to consider when I do move things to the cloud? What do we need to do differently? What's the most, let's say, maybe it's 3 things. What's the 3 most important things for me to consider when I do move a workload to the cloud in terms of security? John, you want to start here on the left?
So I think the first most important thing is what is the data that you're talking about? And we find it deceivingly difficult in organizations to talk about this idea of data governance. So what are the gradations of data? Do you have classification schemes within your own organization? And even saying sensitive, non-sensitive can be a bridge too far for many risk and compliance people. And so that's fundamentally the first question that has to be asked around, hey, are you ready to move to the cloud? I think the second piece is how you're doing your business today. You need to look behind the curtain and have that pragmatic approach and say, yeah, you know what? It's not that great. And so you can do a Delta threat risk assessment or Delta privacy impact assessment to say, you know what, here's how that move is going to be beneficial. And I think the last piece is dip your toe in the cloud. Like have a sense of how your security event incident event management ties together with this. Understand how your security practitioner is going to change their role. Right? Instead of looking at logs first thing in the morning, they might simply say, you know what, my cloud provider's got this, I can see that they're working on this, and then focus on the low and the slow stuff, the really nefarious stuff where, hey, people are coming in and they know your business logic and they're exploiting your business logic, not the scans and not the other pieces.
I'll take a slightly different comment because I know you guys are going to hit on this topic hard. But something we haven't mentioned is, organizations aren't just investing in one cloud provider, one cloud solution, right? And so as you're thinking about your cloud strategy, I think you need to, realize that in your own environment, right? You may times that by 2 or 3 vendors, perhaps. And if you're international, you have more complexities there. So that's the only thing I want to see. Take the elephant in the room, right? And that's, although we all want you to be on our cloud, right? And even companies that are not represented here. The reality is you may pick multiple cloud partners. And I think that's where collaborative and partnerships do come in and will play an importance going forward. So that might be an area of questions you want to ask and work with your vendor to see how friendly are they with working with your provider of choice right? You may have 3 different security providers. Are they working with your 2 or 3 different cloud providers? And start asking those questions.
Yeah, so I'm not going to nail it, but as I said, I think one of the most important things is that you need to be aware that you are responsible for the data that you're putting in the cloud. So you need to take into consideration, are you going to secure the access to your cloud infrastructure, no matter which provider you're using? And again, like one of the key is it's all about visibility. You need to know which cloud application your users or your employee are using, and so on and so forth. So with having the visibility, you can be like more prepared to better protect like everything related to the cloud access. But keep in mind that you are responsible for the data that you're putting in it. Right?
Yeah, I think, Benjamin, that's the key is everyone sees the benefit of moving to the cloud. But a lot of people don't understand where the demarc point is in terms of responsibilities. What part of the cloud are they securing for you and what part of the cloud they're not? And all the data and applications that you're putting on the cloud are really the ultimate responsibility is the consumer of the cloud service. Be it platform, infrastructure, or software as a service, you are ultimately responsible for your data that's stored up there. Right? So you have to think about how do I extend the current policies, and some of them, to John's point, are not good, that are currently residing on-prem and extended to the cloud so it looks and feels the same. So you have a unified management interface that's providing you the capabilities of managing on both sides. Then you need to look at the applications that are in the cloud, core context to your business, right? If it's your email and you want to make sure that email is not interfacing with other applications in the cloud, for instance, HR, are you doing the right level of microsegmentation in the cloud, separating out applications to ensure that they are not going to be hacked, east-west from a database perspective and an application perspective. So you need to really look at what is our security policy today that we enforce on-prem. It needs to get extended to the cloud, and making sure the applications that are being stored out in the cloud are equally secured from each other, even when they're communicating. So you could quarantine them if there is a malware attack or some form of attack that hit that application. So you really need to look at it as, I'm using cloud services, which is great. It provides me elasticity. It provides me rapid routes to market. But at the same time, you, the corporation, are fully responsible for the applications and data that you're storing out there.
Great point. I know there was a question in the back there.
Sort of, not sure relevant or not in this context, but we talk about perimeter defense, and we've talked a lot about it and internally. But a lot of threats are not perimeter defense insights. They're actually caused from social media, digital footprint of most people. So they're going in through impersonation. So your systems aren't fully aware that it's an impersonator coming in because they've actually got the right passwords and everything else. What are your thoughts on digital, I guess social media analysis, some like ZeroFox and other things? Like, how does that fit into all of this, in your opinions?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Different twist. Who wants to tackle that first in terms of social media?
I can jump in. I think social media is an attack vector. So when we look at the top 4 things to do to protect your enterprise, it's to be able to have that education awareness environment, right? So you want to tell your senior execs that people are going to be tracking their behaviors, they're going to be looking to send them phishing attacks, or they'll look to the social media, right? So how many of you have gone onto Facebook to put up your favorite movies? Or what's your first car quiz, right? So we see that happening, and these things are not doing that harvesting. So one is the education awareness to let people know that, hey, these activities are being tracked. Second piece is to build in the artificial intelligence, machine learning into the environments, right? So I know that from our cloud service environment, we keep track of normal behaviors of individuals. So when a privileged account comes in at 3 a.m. and starts to transfer a lot of data, you get an alarm, and you can set that up then to say, hey, you know what, I don't want this activity happening, or I want to shut that down. And you start to then watch those behaviors of individuals to say, this is a trusted role, I want to have this trusted role have multi-factor authentication or different techniques. So you're finding far more fine-grained control over what the behaviors that you expect in your environment to be able to track down those things. And you'll see that evolve. As more machine learning and AI comes in place, and people will get a better understanding.
Now, what I would add to that is we've seen it. We've seen social media, attacks through social media in action. A good example would be, if you have, you talked about, different type of social media but with Facebook, but if you look at it from a LinkedIn perspective, that's a network where a lot of executives come together. How do I, see what's up, just do a simple search on the CFO of a company, all right, and find a way to try and backdoor into their organization and basically spoof his email address and send instructions to send, data or money offshore, right? So that's called a whaling attack. That's where, through the dark web, they figure out ways of figuring out your email address, your phone number, try to spoof your password in order for them to get access to your data and information, and then for your folks inside the accounting department, make it look like the request is coming from the CFO when in fact it's coming from an attacker. So this gets back to anti-phishing, it gets back to anti-malware, all of that technology that we would need to put in place to ensure that if you are being attacked, and even with dual factor authentication, you're able to intercept that, right? So there's various levels of technology available today that we're addressing specifically for social media, right? But it takes, again, back to the point we made earlier, you have to have a practice in place to deal with all levels of your security architecture.
And they need to talk to each other as well. Right? If they're in independent silos, if you have the technology but it's in an independent silo, not connected to other systems, it's not going to be nearly as efficient or effective for you.
That's super interesting. I guess I'm going to change my LinkedIn profile after this. Did we have any other questions here at this point? So certainly sounds, so if I'm a medium-sized, large Canadian company, in order to take advantage of the leading practices, it certainly sounds to me that it would be very, very difficult for me to find, train, and retain the staff required to stay on the leading edge around this. Is that even possible in today's world, or do I have to essentially find an external partner that I can work with as a trusted advisor? Is there any possibility for me to do this on my own, realistically today? And I know you're all biased, of course, service providers, but I mean, it certainly sounds like there is no way that the average company is going to be able to provide sort of best of breed or leading edge security today on their own.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead. You start.
So I think the skills are always in short supply, right? We heard some fantastic new technologies this morning, and try to find experts in that area, hard to find. That said, I think when we start to look at, having a good cyber hygiene, there is a low bar to entry for making sure that you have adequate assurance. The 4 things: keep your machines up to date, put in anti-malware, have a modern machine, and education awareness. If you can do those 4 things, that'll help you be resilient against a whole bunch of things. Then rely on large companies like ourselves. We invest $1 billion a year in IT security R&D. And so leverage that, right? And so make use and have people provide those services on your behalf, and defer that to them, to other organizations that can help.
Yeah, so even working with the best providers in the world, unless you do these internal things, which all comes down to your respective roles, you're going to have to do that regardless of who you work with. Right?
And this is why the cloud solution is very interesting for all these customers, because you save a lot of time. You don't have to worry about patching your system, doing the upgrade, all the maintenance side that consume a lot of time. If you move to the cloud, then you save a tremendous amount of time and money as well by doing that as well.
And we found, so at IBM we created a cognitive SOC, and essentially it's an experience that you can bring your entire team to, and that team could be your security team, your IT ops team, your HR professionals, it could be your executives, and we literally train you in a cyber attack hitting your environment. You guys may have seen this on the news or news clips before, because it's been around now for almost a year. So the question is, can you do it yourself? We're not giving up on training you and helping you manage these situations yourself, but they are very complex, and they can be very complex. And it's not just about finding what's going on and remediating it. What happens to the news? What happens to your stock if you're a public company? How are you reacting publicly to a data breach in your environment? Those are all aspects that you as IT and security professionals need to be able to lead your company and being able to handle, right? And so you can literally, come to an IBM center and get trained on an entire day. We put, an executive in a hot seat with a camera and do a live video feed, literally interviewing the person act like they're on the news, and we show their stock price drop. But your IT teams, they go through live scenarios of actually detecting where this, where this attack is coming from and how to stop it. So I think that's a big part of it, the readiness and the training. And even I was joking around and talking with a few of you over the last couple of days. If your data is being held ransom, do you have a Bitcoin account?
Yeah, I think we had somebody in the audience here who over dinner was saying that they had paid through Bitcoin a ransomware attack.
I was talking with Martin and out there, and Martin said, "Well, how do you know if you pay them, they'll actually give you your data back?" And I said, "Well, you ask them for a reference, right?
Yeah.
Because if they're not going to give you a reference to prove they'll give you your data back, you're not going to pay them."
Yeah.
Right? They're there to make money, a lot of these enterprises. So these are the situations in the training that your team can get better prepared for. And then, if you still need help, right? Obviously, there are some major vendors. Anyone up on this stage can help you react to these incidents and prepare for them.
Yeah, it goes back to education all the time. Like, if you eat by ransomware, which don't pay them. It's not helping. You're actually financing them when you do that, right? So, and it doesn't mean that there is not other stuff that they put behind, even when they supposedly giving you back your data, right? So you never know. So rule number one with ransomware, I would say don't pay them.
I'll go actually even further back than that, because if you think about ransomware, it's because they've encrypted your data and you got to pay for it now. Well, the single easiest way to get around that is have, backups. Have your data. It sounds so, that's like networking 101, but if you have the data backed up, you don't have to pay it. Flush it, restore, right?
Yep.
Because if you are paying them through Bitcoin and everything else, you're just funding the dark web.
Exactly.
They're going to keep doing it, right? And those that don't pay get a bad reputation, and they don't last very long. They have to pop up as new cyber attack criminals, right? But the bottom line is, if specific for ransomware, you have to have an anti-ransomware play, architecturally, obviously. But backing up your data, it should be the very first thing that you should be thinking about.
Absolutely.
Excellent points. I know we need to move on, so one final question from the audience, and then we wrap it.
I think we're wrapped. It's a wrap.
Thank you. Thanks to our panelists.
Thank you.